Hello, everyone. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
You know, if you walk up to almost anyone in their 20s or 30s today, and you just casually bring up the topic of buying a house, you are almost guaranteed to get the exact same reaction.
Oh, yeah.
It usually involves like a heavy sigh, a 1,000-yard stare, and one specific word.
Impossible.
Impossible. Exactly.
It really is the universal conversation killer right now.
Yeah, it really is.
You bring up real estate, and all the oxygen just leaves the room.
Totally.
Prices feel completely detached from local reality, and the whole concept of home ownership is, increasingly viewed as this artifact from a bygone era,
Right.
rather than a realistic milestone for a working professional today.
Exactly. And I've talked to people who seemingly did everything right. You know, they have stable careers, they have steady savings, no terrible debt,
Yeah.
and they still feel like buying a home belongs strictly to their parents' generation. But here's the paradox that I want us to explore today. If we all agree it's impossible, why is housing still one of the most searched financial topics on the internet?
That is the exact friction point. Millions of people are online every single day, actively researching saving strategies, tracking property values, looking up loan structures.
Yeah.
That data tells us something really crucial. The desire hasn't gone away.
Right. The aspiration is fiercely there.
Exactly. People desperately want to make it happen, but they're slamming into a wall that is, well, partly financial and, perhaps more surprisingly, profoundly psychological.
And to figure out exactly what that wall is made of, we are pulling from a really unique piece of source material today.
Yeah, this is interesting.
It's actually a financial script originally designed for English language learners.
Which I know sounds completely counterintuitive for a deep dive into macroeconomic trends.
Right. But what is brilliant about it is that because it tends to teach English, it completely strips away all the confusing, obfuscating financial jargon.
Exactly. It doesn't hide behind complex economic theories. It forces us to look at the foundational math and the human psychology with incredible, undeniable clarity.
It's just so refreshing.
It acts as an amazing diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
And since it is tailored for language learners, it establishes these hyper-clear baselines before it builds its arguments.
Right.
For instance, right out of the gate, it defines the core mechanism of the whole system, the mortgage.
Right, the mortgage.
It simply defines it as a specific type of loan used to buy property, where the property itself serves as a guarantee to the lender.
Meaning if you default, the bank takes the house.
Exactly.
I actually love that it forces us to state the obvious because it grounds the conversation. A mortgage is just a tool to buy an expensive asset over several decades. Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay.
Why are we so universally pessimistic about our ability to use this tool today?
Well, we have to start by validating that heavy sigh you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah.
The baseline reality of the source material is that the numbers really did get harder.
They really did.
This feeling of impossibility is not a collective hallucination. The underlying math of homeownership has genuinely mutated over the past couple of decades.
And it comes down to a widening gap, right?
Yes.
The gap between what the average person earns and what the average home costs.
Precisely. In major cities all over the world, home prices have risen at a velocity that was completely outpaced wage growth.
Oh, wow.
The source gives a really striking historical data point on this. It points out that traditionally, a house used to cost roughly 3 to 4 times an average yearly salary.
3 to 4 times.
That was the accepted macroeconomic ratio. But today,
Yeah.
in those same areas, a house might cost 7, 8, or even 10 times an average yearly salary.
10 times. Let's just pause on that for a second because the physics of that ratio are staggering.
They really are.
If my salary grows by, let's say, 2% a year, but the cost of the house I want grows by 8% a year, the gap between me and that house is actively widening every single day I go to work. I'm actually getting further away from the goal line while actively running toward it.
And that leads directly into the most vicious mechanism the text identifies, the rent cycle.
The rent cycle. Now, the source paints this as a treadmill. But to me, it feels more like trying to fill a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom.
The bucket analogy is perfect. Let's look at the literal mechanics of why this is happening.
Okay.
Because the purchase prices of homes are so astronomically high, the rental market inflates right alongside it.
Oh, right, because people who can't buy have to rent, driving up demand.
Exactly. In many urban centers, rent now consumes such a massive percentage of a person's monthly income, sometimes up to 50%.
50% on just rent. Wow.
Yeah, that saving any meaningful amount of money becomes mathematically suffocating.
And you have to pay for the roof over your head first.
Right.
Which directly impacts the other foundational term our source defines for its language learners, the down payment, which is the initial upfront portion of the total price of a house that you must pay in cash before borrowing the rest.
Right. And here is where the trap snaps shut.
Yeah.
Paying exorbitant rent stops you from accumulating cash.
Right.
Because you can't save cash, so you can't build that down payment. And because you don't have the down payment, you are disqualified from getting the mortgage.
Which forces you to sign another expensive lease.
Exactly. The capital you need to escape the rental market is being entirely consumed by the rental market.
Okay, so let me stop you right there and push back a little on this.
Sure.
Because if the math is this stacked against us, prices at 10 times our salaries, the rent cycle eating our cash, the gap widening every single day, is it fair to just say the system is fundamentally broken for this generation? I mean, why not just throw in the towel?
I get that.
The math sounds completely impossible.
I completely understand why you'd reach that conclusion, and it is a very common one.
Yeah.
But the source material makes a vital distinction here that we cannot ignore.
Okay, what is it?
The math has shifted, and it is meaningfully harder. But harder is not a synonym for impossible.
Even at 10 times an average salary.
Even then. Because averages obscure individual realities. There are still avenues, there are still secondary markets, there are still aggressive saving strategies.
Okay.
The danger the text points out is that when things get significantly harder, our brains tend to round up to impossible.
Round up to impossible. Wow.
Yeah, and that cognitive rounding error is fatal. It stops people from exploring the avenues that do still exist.
That actually explains why people with really good salaries are completely opting out of the market.
Exactly.
So if the math is only partially to blame for this collective despair, what is the other half of the equation?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the math is only half the battle. The other half is happening entirely inside our own heads.
Okay.
The source material pivots here to something really fascinating, the psychology of what it calls distant goals.
And to give the clear, jargon-free definition for our language learners,
Please do.
distant goals are targets that are so large and so far away in the future that they feel abstract and disconnected from your daily reality.
Exactly. And to understand why this paralyzes us, we have to look at how the human brain is wired.
Okay, lay it on me.
Evolutionarily speaking, our brains are optimized for immediate feedback.
Right.
We are built to respond to immediate threats, like a predator in the bushes, and immediate rewards, like finding food.
Survival stuff.
Yeah. Our dopamine systems, the reward centers of our brains, are designed to keep us motivated over short, visible timelines.
So if I want to buy a new laptop, I look at the price, I save for a month or two, I buy it, and I get that dopamine hit. The loop is closed.
Precisely. It's not a purchase you wrap up in a weekend, though, when you're talking about a house.
Right, a house is completely different.
A house requires years of consistent, disciplined saving toward a number that is astronomically large.
Yeah.
It doesn't trigger that basal ganglia dopamine loop. When a goal is massive and a decade away, the human brain literally struggles to process it as a real, tangible thing.
Wait, I have to challenge this premise.
Okay.
Because you hear this narrative a lot from older generations, right? The classic avocado toast argument.
Yes.
They say young folks today just lack discipline. They want instant gratification, they buy expensive coffee, they lack the grit to save. But people in the 1980s also had to save for years to buy a house. Why are we letting people off the hook and blaming evolutionary biology when previous generations managed to do it?
It's a fair question, but it fundamentally misunderstands the scale of the cognitive load today versus the 1980s.
How so?
Well, the source definitively refutes the lack of discipline argument. It isn't that this generation has less grit.
Okay.
It's that the distance to the goal has stretched so far that it triggers a different psychological mechanism.
Interesting.
When a goal feels completely out of scale with your daily effort, the brain's default response isn't to generate motivation. The response is avoidance.
Avoidance as the protective mechanism.
Yes. It is emotionally and cognitively easier for your brain to push the concept away entirely than to sit in the daily discomfort of working towards something that feels unreachable.
Wow.
You aren't failing at discipline. Your brain is actively protecting you from the chronic stress of an abstract, invisible goal.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This natural psychological blind spot is the very thing that causes the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
If your brain tricks you into thinking it's a distant, impossible fantasy to protect you from stress, you don't even open a high-yield savings account.
Nope.
You don't even look at the market. You just opt out entirely.
Exactly. People who could theoretically save toward a home over several years, people who absolutely have the income and the margins to do it,
Yeah.
often never start. Or they start, save for 3 months, and abandon it because there is no immediate visible reward to keep that motivation loop firing against such a massive backdrop.
Okay, so we have this vulnerable, avoidant brain that is already looking for an excuse to quit. But we don't live in a vacuum. We live in a hyper-connected digital world. What happens when we take that avoidant brain and we open our phones?
Oh, we pour gasoline on the fire.
Yeah.
The text spends a significant amount of time exploring how social media acts as an absolute amplifier for all that baseline anxiety.
Because the algorithm loves panic.
It thrives on it.
We are constantly exposed to viral posts, shocking headlines about record-high interest rates, stories of normal people being outbid by faceless corporations paying straight cash.
And this taps into a very specific psychological vulnerability that the source defines: negativity bias.
Oh, okay. Let's define that for the language learner.
Yeah, this is the natural psychological pattern where our brains pay more attention to and remember more strongly alarming or negative information compared to positive or neutral facts.
Right, because remembering the negative thing keeps you alive. It's the old cliche. Remembering where the tiger lives is more important than remembering where the pretty flowers are.
Well, let's update that analogy for the digital age, because it's more pervasive than a tiger in the woods.
Okay.
Think of negativity bias, like dropping a single drop of red dye into a clear glass of water.
Oh, I like that.
That one drop diffuses and tints the entire glass.
Ah.
On social media, one viral post about a dilapidated shed in Silicon Valley selling for $3 million acts like that drop of dye.
Right.
It tints your perception of the entire national or even global housing market.
That is such a vivid way to look at it. If I see that shed in Silicon Valley, I immediately think, well, the whole country is broken. I have no chance.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how a loud, capitalized headline declaring homeownership impossible for everyone triggers our threat response.
Yeah, it goes viral because it feels emotionally powerful and, frankly, validating to our avoidant brains.
Right.
It gives us permission to quit.
Exactly. Meanwhile, a quiet, nuanced article explaining how homeownership is still highly achievable in certain mid-sized cities.
Or detailing specific state grant programs for first-time buyers.
Right. That gets completely ignored.
Because nuance is boring. Nuance doesn't get retweets. Nuance requires work.
It requires cognitive effort, which we've already established our brains are trying to avoid.
Yep.
But the true danger of this social media echo chamber is that it creates a self-reinforcing trap.
How so?
Well, constant exposure to alarming, generalized messaging makes you internalize the panic as absolute truth.
And the tragic result, as the source points out, is that people stop researching their own specific personal possibilities.
Exactly.
If you're listening to this and you've given up on checking Zillow because of a viral tweet you saw, you are letting a generalized cultural narrative dictate your personal financial reality.
That is spot on.
You think, the market in Manhattan is impossible, so I guess I can't buy a house in my suburb in Ohio either.
It's the surrender of agency.
Yeah.
You adopt the globalized narrative of doom instead of looking at your local data. And frankly, this surrender is compounded by another massive psychological burden.
What's that?
We aren't just comparing our situation to the viral horror stories on social media. We are haunted by the ghosts of previous generations. We're constantly comparing ourselves across time.
Oh, this is the part of the text that hit me the hardest. The generational comparison.
Yeah.
Because it's usually not strangers on the internet doing this to us. It says our own parents or our older colleagues. We measure our current progress against a version of homeownership that they experienced 20 or 30 years ago.
And we have to recognize that their version of homeownership was built during a time when incomes, housing prices, and the cost of borrowing money created a fundamentally different and generally much more accessible path.
The text has a great term for this, actually, For our language learners, it defines the unfair comparison,
Right.
which is judging your current situation against economic conditions that simply no longer exist.
It is the definition of a rigged game.
Yeah.
You are holding your financial progress to the standards of an economy that has been decommissioned.
That's a great way to put it.
The source specifically highlights interest rates as the major invisible factor here.
Okay, let's briefly define interest rates in this context.
Sure. Interest rates are simply the percentage a bank charges you to borrow their money. It's the cost of borrowing.
And to give that some macroeconomic context, while interest rates were famously very high in the 1980s, sometimes hitting 15 or 18%,
Very high, yeah.
the actual principal cost of the house was incredibly low relative to an average salary.
Exactly. The ratio of the total loan cost against an average salary was entirely different.
So even with a high rate, the actual money borrowed was small.
Right. A high interest rate on a house that costs 3 times your salary is painful, but manageable.
Yeah.
A slightly lower interest rate on a house that costs 10 times your salary is crushing.
Crushing.
Oh, no.
Because 10 times your salary is a massive base number to apply any interest to.
Exactly. The fundamental math of what a dollar could borrow and the purchasing power of an hour of labor is completely divorced from today's reality.
I really want to emphasize this for anyone listening who is stuck in this specific trap, because it creates this persistent, invisible weight.
It does.
You hit 30 or 35, and you look around and think, my parents had a 3-bedroom house, 2 cars, and a yard by this age. I have 3 roommates and a dying houseplant.
Right.
I must be doing something terribly fundamentally wrong. It breeds this profound sense of personal failure.
And that is a core takeaway from this text that absolutely needs to be highlighted.
Please do.
Struggling to buy a home today is not a personal financial failure.
Yeah, okay.
It is not a moral failing. You can be doing everything reasonably possible, working hard, getting promotions, saving diligently, being responsible, and still struggle to cross the threshold.
Because the threshold moved.
Precisely. It is simply a reflection of navigating a genuinely different economic environment than the one previous generations navigated at your exact age.
Right.
You aren't failing to walk the path. The terrain itself is tilted into a steep mountain.
Just knowing that, internalizing that you aren't the problem, the environment has shifted, it relieves so much of that guilt.
It really does.
But, okay, let's take a breath and look at where we are. We know the macroeconomic math is harder.
Yes.
We know our brains are naturally fighting us by avoiding distant goals. We know social media is acting like red dye, amplifying our negativity bias.
Right.
And we're unfairly punishing ourselves by comparing our progress to the 1980s economy.
It's a lot.
It feels incredibly heavy. So what does this all mean? How do we actually fix this feeling of impossibility without just burying our heads in the sand?
This is where the source provides a really empowering pivot. It doesn't just diagnose the disease. It offers a specific regimen to cure the paralysis.
Okay, I am ready for the cure.
And the ultimate solution it presents is a masterclass in behavioral psychology, breaking an enormous, abstract goal into small, specific, intensely visible steps.
Making the invisible goal visible to bypass the brain's avoidance trigger.
Exactly. And the text references a concept called coast fire to illustrate how this works mechanically.
Oh, yeah. Let's define coast fire briefly, as it was covered previously in the source's broader curriculum.
Right. Coast fire is a financial independence strategy where you save very aggressively in your early working years until your investment portfolio reaches a critical mass where compound interest takes over.
So you front load the work.
Exactly. At that point, you can coast. You stop contributing new money entirely, and the interest alone grows the pot large enough to fund your traditional retirement.
Now wait, why is the source bringing up an early retirement strategy in a discussion about buying a house?
Because of how coast fire changes the psychology of a massive number.
Oh, I see.
Think about traditional retirement. If I tell a 25-year-old they need $2 million to retire, their brain initiates that avoidance protocol we talked about.
Right. $2 million is an abstract, distant goal. It means nothing to my daily life.
Exactly. They panic, they think it's impossible, they don't even start. But if that same 25-year-old uses a coast fire calculator, the math might tell them, you don't need to worry about $2 million.
Okay.
You just need to save $500 a month for the next 10 years. If you do that, you are done forever.
Oh, wow. Suddenly, the finish line isn't $2 million in 40 years. The finish line is $500 this month.
Oh, that is brilliant, isn't it?
You are shrinking the goal to fit inside the brain's processing window.
Exactly.
I can't wrap my head around $2 million, but I can absolutely wrap my head around $500. I can strategize around $500.
Precisely. Extremely large financial goals become psychologically manageable and even motivating when they are translated into smaller, clearly defined short-term targets.
Okay.
So, drawing from the psychology, the source outlines a concrete 5-step action plan to combat housing pessimism.
I love actionable steps. Let's walk through this and let's make sure we put some real concrete examples on each of these so our listeners can actually apply them today.
Great idea.
Step 1, acknowledge the psychological block.
Right. Step 1 is pure metacognition, thinking about how you think.
Okay.
You have to recognize that when you feel the urge to say, I'll just deal with housing later, or when you feel that wave of exhaustion at the thought of looking at prices, that is not a personal flaw.
It's just your human brain reacting to a distant goal.
Exactly. It's your brain trying to protect you from stress.
So, practically speaking, you essentially have to have a conversation with yourself. You say, I know you're scared of the big number brain. I know you want to avoid this, but we're going to look at it anyway.
Yes. Just naming the avoidance strips it of its power.
That makes total sense.
Acknowledging the friction helps you consciously choose to push through it, which leads perfectly to step 2.
Which is?
Tune out the generalized narrative.
Oh, right. If negativity bias is keeping you trapped in a state of panic, you have to ruthlessly cut off the supply of that panic.
You must stop letting viral algorithms dictate your financial reality. As long as you are doom-scrolling housing despair, your brain will remain in a threat response state, and you will never take constructive action.
So a concrete example for step 2.
Yeah.
Go on your phone right now, open your social media apps, and unfollow every single doom-scrolling real estate account. You know exactly the ones we're talking about.
Absolutely.
The accounts that only post about how private equity firms are buying up entire neighborhoods in cash, or the ones posting screenshots of million-dollar shacks.
They do not help you.
That information does absolutely nothing to help you buy a house. It only triggers your negativity bias and gives you an excuse to quit.
Right.
Block them, unfollow them, mute the keywords, protect your mindset.
That is a perfect execution of step 2. You are clearing out the noise, which frees up the cognitive space you desperately need for step 3.
Which is research your specific numbers.
Meaning, ignore the national headlines and find out what is actually happening in your backyard.
Right. The cultural narrative is vast, vague, and terrifying. You need specific data.
Exactly. Look at your own individual market and your own individual income. If you live in a mid-sized city in Ohio or a suburb in Texas, the terrifying headlines about the housing crisis in London, Toronto, or San Francisco do not apply to your daily reality.
Okay, so let's give a concrete example for step 3.
Yeah, let's do it.
Don't just guess what a house costs. Sit down this weekend, open a real estate site, and find out the actual median cost of a starter home in your specific zip code. Or a zip code 30 minutes away that you'd be willing to commute from. Find out what property taxes actually are in that county because they vary wildly.
They really do.
Go to your state government's website and look up first-time homebuyer grants. You might be shocked to find there are programs that cover down payments for specific income brackets.
Exactly. You have to replace the vague anxiety with hard, boring data.
Because hard data, no matter how intimidating it might initially seem, can be strategized around.
Right. Vague anxiety cannot, which is the entire foundation of step 4.
Set a trackable monthly target.
Yes. This is where we apply that coast fire psychology. This is where we shrink the distant goal.
I see.
You must transform the enormous total amount into a specific monthly number. The brain needs something small enough to comprehend and execute on today.
So instead of waking up every day and thinking, oh my God, I need $50,000 for a down payment.
Which just makes you want to go back to sleep.
Right. It really does. You do the math, you divide it out, you reframe it as, I need to save $400 a month for the next several years.
And notice how your body physically reacts differently to those two statements.
Oh, completely.
I need $50,000 causes panic. $400 a month causes your brain to start problem solving.
Exactly. $400 a month is a tangible puzzle. You can look at your budget and say, okay, I can negotiate my car insurance. I can cancel 2 subscriptions I forgot about.
Right.
I can cook dinner at home 2 extra nights a week. And I can pick up 1 freelance gig or extra shift. You can absolutely find $400 if you strategize. You cannot randomly find $50,000.
That reframing changes everything about how you interact with your money.
Yeah.
It moves you from a state of passive anxiety into a state of active, empowered management.
You are in control again.
You are. And that brings us to the final and perhaps most important psychological hack. Step 5.
Focus on visible progress.
Right.
Because even if we shrink the goal to a monthly target, the actual house is still years away. We still need to manufacture that dopamine hit to keep the motivation loop firing.
Exactly. You have to create your own immediate short-term rewards. You need to track those smaller monthly contributions in a way that gives your brain the visible win it evolutionarily craves.
A great concrete example of this, and I know it sounds almost aggressively analog, but it works, is literally putting a physical chart on your refrigerator.
I love this.
Let's say your goal is that $400 a month. Draw a grid. Every single time you transfer that $400 into your dedicated house savings account at the end of the month, you take a marker and you color in a block on the fridge.
That sounds almost childish to some people, but neurologically, it is incredibly sophisticated.
Right, because psychologically, checking that box or coloring in that square releases dopamine. It completely neutralizes the overwhelming pessimism. When you are coloring in that block, you aren't worrying about macroeconomic interest rates or the global housing market.
No, you're not.
You are just securing your win for the month. You are making the progress visible. You are proving to yourself that you are moving forward.
It is remarkably effective.
Yeah.
And when you look at people who successfully navigate the path toward homeownership today, even in these incredibly hostile, difficult markets, they're almost always doing exactly this. They aren't relying on generalized cultural narratives. They have tuned out the doom scrolling. They have pulled specific local information, and they are executing on specific, manageable, trackable steps.
Because specific information, even when the news is difficult, feels far more manageable than vague, overwhelming pessimism.
It really does.
Because when it's specific, it's just a math problem. And you can solve a math problem over time, but when it's vague, it's an existential crisis.
Obviously.
Okay, let's take a step back and quickly recap the 5 key pillars we've unpacked today from this really illuminating source material.
That's good.
First, we validated the pain. The shifting macroeconomic math is real. Prices have drastically outpaced wages, and the rent cycle genuinely makes capital accumulation harder. Second, we uncovered the neuroscience of distant goals, exploring how our brains naturally trigger avoidance protocols when faced with massive abstract targets.
Right.
Third, we explored the digital trap, how algorithms and our own negativity bias amplify that avoidance, making the situation feel far worse than the local data might suggest. Definitely.
Fourth, we identified the trap of unfair generational comparisons, reminding ourselves that struggling in today's economy is not a personal failure, but a reflection of a vastly different economic reality.
Yeah.
And finally, we walked through the 5-step plan to break that massive, seemingly impossible goal down into small, specific, intensely trackable steps to bypass our brain's natural defenses.
It really is a comprehensive, multidisciplinary look at why we feel the way we do about housing today.
It really is.
It blends economics, neuroscience, and digital sociology beautifully. And honestly, looking at all of this together, it raises a truly massive question for me.
Oh.
One that goes a bit beyond just the mechanics of saving for a down payment.
Where does this lead us?
Well, if the macroeconomic conditions have permanently shifted for this generation, as the math clearly shows us it has,
Right.
and the traditional path to buying a house is fundamentally different and vastly more difficult, are we on the verge of entirely redefining what home and financial stability actually mean for the future? That is a massive paradigm shift to consider.
Think about it. For the last 70 years, homeownership was the undisputed default marker of arriving at adulthood and financial success.
Right, the white picket fence.
Exactly. But if it simply isn't the default anymore for an entire generation, what takes its place?
Wow, yeah.
Will we see a cultural shift toward lifelong renting, paired with highly aggressive automated stock market investing to build wealth instead of real estate equity?
That's a huge possibility.
Or will communal living, cooperative housing, or multi-generational households shed their stigmas, and become the new gold standard of community stability.
Yeah.
The script we looked at today shows us how to hack our psychology to navigate the current system, but it really makes you wonder if the system itself is on the precipice of a massive cultural redefinition.
That is something to really chew on. If the white picket fence isn't the universal finish line anymore, what do we replace it with? I love that thought.
It's a big one.
We will leave that with all of you to ponder as you look at your own financial goals. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Remember, understanding why something feels overwhelming, understanding the neuroscience and the macroeconomics behind your stress is always the very first step to conquering it. See you next time.